So my name is Kenzie Woodbridge. I am excited to be here at my 5th Write the Docs. And I'm especially excited to be up here talking to you because Sorry. I'm especially excited to be up here talking to you because attending this conference in 2014 basically changed my life and my career. All right. To be clear, though, I'm not necessarily promising to change your life or career. That's too much pressure. What I'm trying to offer up with this talk is that there are many ways to look at a situation, and changing the way you look at it can reveal strategies and solutions that you wouldn't have considered before. All right. So let me tell you what I'll tell you. Here's my plan. First, I'll give you a little real-life context for my work situation so you can understand where I'm coming from as a documentarian, and since that informs all of my interpretations here. Then I'll offer up a few caricatures of some of the folks you might find in any technical organization. I'll introduce you to player-type theory and try to connect it to documentation. And I'll finish up by offering up some possible strategies that this application of the theory suggests. Also, I hope to make you laugh, if I can, because basically that's how I measure my self-worth. But, you know, no pressure, though. So, as a few of you know, because I like to say it a lot at parties for some reason, I work in the IT department at the British Columbia Institute of Technology in Burnaby, BC, Canada. So, like Matthew yesterday, that explains my accent. I'm kidding. It was funnier when he said it, but anyway. So in my job, you know, I wear a lot of hats. So, you know, behold, hats. So, for instance, I coordinate the support for our distributed web publishing community. I do a lot of internally focused technical training. I'm a community manager on our social intranet tool. But my favorite part of my job, likely represented here either by, you know, this extraordinary chapeau or possibly, you know, the top hat paired with the sassy monocle, is administering BCIT's knowledge base, which I've been doing one way or another for over 12 years. I now have a dry mouth, sorry. So I work in this educational institute, BCIT. BCIT is BC's second largest post-secondary. It has 5 campuses, it has 2,700 faculty and staff, and they teach and support almost 50,000 students a year. Students come to BCIT to learn everything from specialty nursing, to financial management, to aviation mechanics, to bridge watchmen, to welding, to programming, to carpentry, to human resource management, to English as another language. What I'm trying to get across in that description is that there are a lot of complexities and a lot of different people with a lot of different devices, trying to access a lot of different services, and so on. One way in which we're very fortunate is that we have a centralized IT department. That's actually pretty unusual in a post-secondary of our size. So at BCIT, that means that all of the labs, all of the Wi-Fi, all of the projectors, all of the learning management systems, content management systems, intranet tools, and so on, all of that is managed by a group of about 130 people who are all in one big, large department. Sorry. Yes, and that's because we're supporting about 500 credentialed programs. All right. So this means that our documentation needs are also incredibly varied and complex. When we're looking at is a word cloud I created just from our public knowledge base titles. And you can see it sort of runs the gamut. So we have internally developed software that needs to be documented for other developers in the department. We have a whole bunch of apps that we created in-house. We support a few open source projects that we took over when they were abandoned by their original developer. We have enterprise software that has been customized for BCIT, so we can't use their standard documentation. We have to document it for our circumstance. There's all sorts of things. And for students, you know, 30 years ago, we were supporting students in labs or on a mainframe. But now with BYOD, bring your own device, of course, we have to support them in accessing all of our services on, who knows how many different devices as well. So I'm not going to pretend to you for even a moment that our documentation is perfect or cohesive. It is incomplete and far more scattered than I would like, but, although there are still persistent, significant gaps, I have managed to fill a few of those gaps using some of the strategies that I'll suggest at the end of this talk. Okay. Documentation exists because it is created by people and exists to serve people. So I'm going to start by sketching out a few personas in our little drama here that I feel you will know pretty well. I'm trying to make them, I hope, familiar to you. When I was writing this talk, I tried to figure out how I could be super inclusive in the names I chose, but I realized that because there are some slightly negative characteristics, especially in a couple of the personas, I didn't want to accidentally tie those negative characteristics to any particular group of people. So instead of using a variety of names and genders here, I'm going to use the singular they as the pronoun for each, and I decided to name them all after cruciferous vegetables. Mainly because I like cruciferous vegetables. All right, so here's our first. Brussels sprout, or Sprout for short, is an experienced support desk person. They love their job because they enjoy helping people solve problems. They have a very good understanding of end users, including what tasks those users most commonly want to do, and what level of expertise those users are coming in with. Sprout has significant general technical skill, but they are a person-helping specialist rather than a technical specialist. As much as possible, they want to avoid referring their end users onto the technical specialists, both because it's inefficient and also because, they don't want to interrupt those specialists' work if they don't have to. So, does that sound familiar? I'm guessing that all of you know at least one Sprout in the world, and I'm also guessing that some of you, in fact, are Sprout. All right. So, let me sketch out another persona here in our little vegetative drama. Turnip. Yep. Turnip could be any number of different technical specialists, but for our purposes, let's say that Turnip is a server administrator, probably Linux. Definitely Linux, okay. Turnip does not like users very much. Users exist to justify the existence and maintenance of servers. And my friends, those servers are beautiful. I mean, we're maybe not all equipped to appreciate that beauty, but they are so perfectly configured and their uptime is just to die for. Turnip, though, though not a terrible person necessarily, can sometimes be a bit too openly contemptuous of people who can't understand what a server configuration means just by looking at it. And they resent requests to explain what's going on. I mean, look, if you're not going to spend the hours that they have spent, minutely examining and understanding this thing, you don't deserve to have this information just handed to you on a platter, right? Familiar? Maybe a little too familiar? Yeah. Okay, so we have Sprout and Turnip. We need a couple more. Kale, yeah. Kale is very popular these days. Somehow, if there are 15 projects on the go, Kale is always going to be at the very, head of the most exciting and buzzwordy project. Let's say it's 2008. Kale is definitely reading the responsive website redesign project. Kale also knows how and when to schmooze. They show up at meetings when important people are there. And at the end of the project, their name is at the top of the admittedly really incomplete list of deserving team members who get the public kudos. Kale is also maybe just a little too cool for this here IT department. They are a snazzy dresser, which, since I thought we all had an agreement that it was like jeans and geeky or ironic t-shirts, they're letting down the side, I think. On the other hand, if Kale is on a project, that project is likely going to come in on time and on budget, and they're going to do what it takes to make that happen, because they really like to win at IT. And finally, all right, I know we don't want to, but we're going to have to talk about broccoli, no matter how awkward it is. Okay, it's hard to pin down exactly how technically skilled broccoli is, or what their availability is, or where they sit in the organization and what their responsibilities are. They are often eager to get involved in projects, but then at some point, when it becomes really critical, they become this weird, unaccountable bottleneck. broccoli always somehow manages to get hold of the most important thing, and then they make everybody else wait for it. Broccoli is great at engineering a situation where you're the one who is stuck your neck out, and they're the one causing the problem, but no one will ever hold them to account for that. So I'm not saying, I would hope that there are no broccolis in this room. I'm hoping that there isn't a broccoli in your workplace, but I'm guessing that most of us have encountered such a person in our careers at least once, and they are pretty frustrating. All right, now some of you might be sitting there saying, hold on, Kenzie, you led us down a garden path with your talk description. This is all vegetables and stereotypes. I came here to listen to someone apply an esoteric and outdated ludic research framework to documentation strategy. Where's the mud talk? All right, my friends, let's do this. Okay, so put up your hand if you know what a mud is. That's pretty good, that's pretty good. All right, now keep your hands up, keep your hands up. All right, so I have my hand up as well. Put your hand down unless you have played a mud ever. All right, keep your hand up unless you have played a mud in the last 5 years. Oh, all right, so all of you people with your hands up, we need to become besties, obviously. So come and talk to me at the party. All right, I played a mud just on the weekend because I needed to get this screen capture here. All right, it's real, exactly. All right, MUDs, or multi-user dungeons, are text-only online multiplayer games. The very first ones were created in the 70s. Their popularity likely peaked in the late 90s, but there are still hundreds online and playable today, including this one. Richard Bartle and Roy Trubshaw created one of the very first MUDs as technology students let loose on a university mainframe computer in 1978. And this MUD, which you see me inexpertly navigating, is actually a version of that original MUD. All right. So in 1996, Richard Bartle, one of those two original creators, published an article in the first Journal of MUD Research, which was a thing. Okay, in which he described 4 types of players, differentiated by their motivations. The easiest way to explain the types is to sketch out a simple combinatory table here. So we only need 2 axes. One axis I'll mark as interact at one end and act at the other. I find it helps to think of it as interact with and act on. The other axis has players at one end and world at the other. Then each of the 4 quadrants is a combination of the 2 traits. So up at the top left, we have the combination of interact and players. These are the folks whom Bartle called socializers. They have fun by interacting, usually pleasantly, with other players in the game. They might play, but they're not playing to win. They're not necessarily playing to explore. It's a social interaction that interests them. Then over here, we have interact and world. These are explorers. They have fun by gaining in-depth knowledge of the game, its mechanics, and the world. Though they might have the hard-won skill to beat the game, that's not really interesting to them. Finding the hidden things and all the little interesting game mechanics, that's what's interesting. So then down here we have act and world. Bartle named these players achievers, and they have fun by acting on the game. So they like to beat the game, they want to get the highest level, beat all the quests, get the best armor, and so on. And then in the final quadrant, we have act and people, and Bartle, not one for mincing words, called these players killers. They have fun by acting on other players, often by disrupting their play, perhaps by killing them, destroying what they have built. They like having power over others, and they enjoy the aggrieved reaction that they get, especially from achievers or socializers when they manage to kill them. All right. Those are Bartle's 4 player types, and player type theory posits both a number of interactions and dynamics that occur between players of various types, and also suggests ways to design a MUD, or a virtual world generally, to encourage or discourage various types in hopes of finding a stable equilibrium. It's caveat time. All right. Before I go on, I just want to reassure any of you who might be starting to get itchy at the idea that there are somehow only 4 types of people in the world. No. I just want to say it's obviously a very simplistic model, and our identities and motivations are inherently unstable. So Bartle himself suggests that players may have different motivations in different contexts, or may progress through all 4 of them over time. So I'm not explaining it has extraordinary explanatory power. It's just that it's quite fun. I'm an academic communications nerd, to take a theory or model developed over here and apply it to this other thing that's completely unrelated. This is what I do for fun. Invite me to all your parties. Okay, caveat over. So I was reading Bartle's player type, article, and I noticed something. Although Bartle was writing about playing a game and the kind of things that motivate individuals to play it, he sure mentioned documentation an awful lot. Especially when he talks about the difference between the top and bottom half of our combinatory, interact and world. So, for example, there's this, where he's talking about the difference between designing a game for explorers versus achievers. So, ways to emphasize interacting over acting. Make the help facilities produce vague information. Produce cryptic hints when players appear stuck. Right? Oh, and then there's also this. So if you want to try and emphasize acting over interacting, you'd provide a game manual. You'd include auto map facilities and auto log facilities and so on. Interesting, right? It immediately struck me that this might offer an interesting insight into the phenomenon that I had seen a lot in my workplace, where the most specialized and expert people often write the least documentation. If those deep dive specialists are motivated in their work by discovery, by figuring things out, then having proper documentation takes all the fun and enjoyment out of that for them. Setting up the best possible server environment or writing the best PHP integration of 3 incompatible databases is only an engaging task worthy of their skills and their attention if there isn't a walkthrough telling them each and every step along the way. If they are explorers, it makes sense that they can thrive in a tech environment with poor documentation because it makes the work engaging and interesting. Make sense? So I started thinking about how to apply this model in a work environment. Like mine, but let's pretend it's not mine, because that would be awkward when I have to get back to my workplace. Okay, so let's go back to our combinatory again. I'm going to modify it just slightly for the workplace. I'm going to leave interact and act just as they are, but I'm going to swap out players for users, because I want to limit the scope of this a bit. Then I'm going to swap out world for technology, since that's all we're interacting with. Now, let's bring back those personas I talked about a few minutes ago. You've probably already guessed from what I just said that I'm proposing that Turnip is an explorer. Sprout, who enjoys interacting with users, obviously a socializer. Kale, then, with their love of ending up on the top of the heap, of winning, with their glossy dark green bumpiness, is an achiever. That's not a quality that Bartle called out, but I'm just going to name it. And yeah, that makes Broccoli, the gatekeeper and weird subtle power player of the group, a killer. Right. As an aside, when I was coming up with which crucifers we would go for, my friend and I had a big argument about whether Kale was an achiever or a killer, because my friend is very bigoted on the topic of Kale, but as I said, Kale's very popular, and that's clearly an achiever thing. So, and Broccoli's a killer for no good reason. It's just, I had to include Broccoli, and I love broccoli. I don't know why I'm doing this, but all right, Sprout first. So, for documentation, I'm going to suggest to you that since Sprout's focus is on users and meeting users' needs, the Sprouts of the world often love documentation because it helps them solve a user's problem quickly and without missteps. They can send a user to the documentation, or they can walk them through it themselves. They provide a consistent experience for people. They love it. If Sprout finds something like a workaround that isn't documented, they often will document it. We've already heard that from a couple of talks yesterday. If Sprout is working in a place without a central documentation repository, or if they are prohibited from contributing to that resource, they will be the person with 40 Word documents on their desktop that they can quickly email out to a user in need, right? Sprout is an important cog in the machine. Bartle says very clearly that if you don't have sufficient socializers in the game, if you can't attract enough of them in, you're never going to have a stable equilibrium in a game, except for the stable equilibrium that he names, which is of nobody's in your game. That's very stable. All right. As an explorer, Turnip is, of course, motivated by knowledge, likes to have the freedom to explore. This introduces a tension in the workplace where there can actually be a significant difference between technical skill level and of different people in the organization. For example, something that I hear a lot from the Turnips in my department, whom to be clear I love, is that they don't want to tell users best practices for how to use a tool because the tool is flexible and users should want to spend a bit of time exploring it and figuring out how they want to use it for themselves. In my experience, that is not what those users want. All right. Or certain users, likely explorers themselves, do want that freedom, but they're going to do it whether or not I give them best practices or not. Turnip may sometimes be socially motivated by showing off their knowledge to others, but in my experience, the Turnips of the world can often tend to be a bit impatient and introverted and definitely don't want to tell someone something, even the first time, never mind subsequent times. If Turnip does document something, I would suggest that it is likely to be reminiscent of the quote I already showed you, cryptic hints that only another explorer could parse. Sorry. No, where are we now? Sorry, my friends. I'm telling you everything that I... How does Kale relate to documentation? It really depends on how it fits with what they're trying to achieve. Documentation is a part of the criteria that will be used for evaluating the success of a project. It will be a priority for them. Otherwise, maybe not, right? As a documenter, I would suggest that Kale is also often an opportunist. So if there is an existing documentation source, they'll be very happy to reuse that and integrate it in. And that can have varying success, but is actually not a terrible strategy. And then finally, I'm going to suggest that in addition to their other difficult traits, Broccoli is predictably terrible at documentation. Not because of lack of ability, but because information is power, right? If something is well documented, it makes it possible for others to avoid Broccoli's power plays. For example, I'm going to guess, Broccoli is in charge of the weird legacy software that your company is still inexplicably dependent on. And if so, then they are definitely not documenting it, because then that would limit their ability to impose their power on others. Broccoli may be motivated to occasionally add to documentation, but they do so only when it shows a coworker up, right? Yeah. Yeah. So what next in our visual drama? Takes all kinds. As a technical writer, you don't necessarily get to decide who to work with. So if you're presented with this delicious group, how can you make it better? Well, I admit to you I'm going to cheat a little in this section. I'm going to draw suggestions and solutions from Bartle's player type theory, but I'm also going to insert one or two of my own tried and tested practical solutions that I developed before I started thinking about the theory, when I think I can get away with it. Although I've told you now, so. Anyway, socializers, they really just need your support. So they can be incredible documentation allies, but because of their connection to users and the perception that they are less technically skilled, which may not well be true, they are often not accorded much respect from the other types. I suggest a two-front approach. First, you want to support them in getting their documentation written, published, and organized. So provide them with templates, make it really easy for them to slot their content in. Assist them with publishing, which might mean doing some rewriting, especially if they're new to the whole concept of documentation, or if English is only their fifth language, as is true for one of the people in my department, and impose a structure and organization on it. So they can just give you whatever they have, and then it's your job, as always, to work on the taxonomy and all that stuff. And then additionally, I think we need to support those people in the broader department. So you can expect to advocate for them to others. You really want them, you want to say, hey, draw this person to the conversation, they have the expertise you're looking for. Don't let people talk down the support workers in your presence. It's not okay. Yeah. Work to include them where they are excluded, so bring them into those meetings, and give them public kudos when they do something that's great. Like mention to the world, hey, it's so great to have all these articles that so-and-so wrote for me that's really filling in a gap. That's great. Explorers, let's make this quick. Explorer, we just got to extract it from them somehow. So reframing strategies. This is one of the things I do a lot, is I reframe what documentation actually is. So I might tell them, if you write this documentation, it shows off how much you know, right? Like, this is a way for you to show off your expertise to others, especially to the other explorer types in the department. It keeps the icky users away, right? If it's written down, they don't have to come to you for this. It's another thing to have knowledge of, like having the expertise to be able to do documentation. That's another thing that you can explore and, figure out the intricacies of, because there's a lot, right? We have conferences about this. Thank you. And then you need to also support those users. Apologies. You can expect to try and reduce barriers. Once again, I suggest templates. Templates again. Rewrite the docs for the audience. So don't expect them to be the person with the user empathy who's writing the end user documentation, right? Get what you can get out of them and then repurpose it in all the ways. Leave it in its original state for other explorers in the department for the internal documentation, and then it's your job, as always, to rewrite it for the other audience. And help enforce the expectation to look at docs first, because one of the things I have often heard from explorers is, well, I did write that up, and then people still come and ask me this question, it's just so useless. In which case I say, you are totally allowed, because you did write it up, but you didn't put it in the knowledge base, give it to me, I'll put it in the knowledge base, and then you say, I documented this, it's in the knowledge base, you have to go and look at it first before you can come and talk to me about it. And like, back them up on that. That's the expectation that we're gonna have. Achievers, you know, they're all about buzzwords. How about this one? How about gamification? Yeah, there we go. So gamifying strategies for achievers. To motivate them, you're gonna wanna post your doc and writing and reviews, you know, stats. So like one of the things I do when the review rate gets low is I encourage everyone to start reviewing their articles again, and then when it gets up, I'll post, hey, thanks to all of these great people who helped me get, the stats up. We're back to 90% reviewed, it's amazing. Or, post how many people, somewhere public to your internal group, have written how many articles, right? Make it so that they get that public-facing kudos that they like. I'm not sure if this is the best idea from a user point of view, but something that I think might be motivating to those people is to make the authors of resources visible to the audience, because then they can see their name in lights, right? And advocate constantly for docs as critical success criteria in projects. Yes, of course. And you might say, well, that's quite a bullet point, Kenzie. It is. That's why you're here for the rest of the talks. I don't have time for this. All right. Support strategies. Expect to be available on short notice. So I keep track of what big projects are going down, because I know that these people are going to come to me 3 weeks before the launch of the project that has been going on for a year and a half and say, we need you to publish these 19 articles. Yeah, of course they are, because it's a success criteria. I've had some success in that, but now that means that I have to drop everything and do this. And you know what? I'm just going to do it because that's how I get the docs in there, right? Provide and enforce templates, again, and publicly thank them, because that's kind of the support that they need. Finally, killers. Oh dear. Yeah. Well, I sincerely hope you're not having to deal with killers, frankly. But if you are, and there's no way to get those people off your project, then player type theory does suggest a few strategies you can use. First, you want to protect yourself. Not just because these strategies can help with actually getting documentation done, they potentially can, but because, and I'm not joking now, work matters, your experience of it matters, and you are worth protecting, right? So here's what I suggest. Keep all discussions with these people public. They are not trustworthy. Only have conversations with them about the thing in the group stand-up meeting in front of other people, or in email. Don't let them corner you, buttonhole you, put you in a corner, and have this conversation where they promise to do a thing and then they're not accountable. Don't permit it. Just get out. That's what I say. Document everything, ironically, by which I mean have it in writing. If you have a conversation with them about the thing, write them an email after and say, thanks for that conversation. If you end up having this conversation, please, I thank you for agreeing to have it done by such and such a date. Then you can refer back to it. And engage explorers in the struggle. They are the natural enemies of killers because they know more and they know how to undermine them. That's what Bartle would say. But also, they tend to not really want to put up with their crap either. And then, finally, go forward strategies. You should treat agreements like agreements. One of the biggest things that I came out of Write the Docs with was the realization that it was the most respectful way to me interact with my coworkers to just expect them to do their job. Like, not to kowtow to, their, putting things off. And follow up with them. Expect but do not tolerate delays. Expect but do not engage in power plays. So that's what I got. You're awesome. I'm awesome. Let's chat.